What about this issue around the pro-Palestinian marches, and specifically the one planned for Armistice Day here in London on Saturday? Do you think it should go ahead?
Well, my own view is that it shouldn't, and it shouldn't because it's not because it should be banned, but because it's a grotesque insult to the British people. It's a deliberately provocative day to choose for such a march. It's a deliberately provocative march. As the Telegraph showed just yesterday, around half of the organisers of the march are themselves linked with Hamas, which isn't at all surprising. We have Hamas commanders, after all, who live in London very safely, often on welfare. So, yes, I think it's an intolerable march. It's an intolerable provocation to the British public and the British government and the British police, by the way, who Saturday after Saturday have been made to put up with unbelievable taunting and abuse from the marchers. It's very clear by now, Piers, that what is happening is that every week the crowds are pushing and seeing if they can push the police further and further, harder and harder, and be more and more provocative. And they're managing to do that. But this is culminating this weekend. And here's the thing. I don't think, and I certainly read and hear, that large numbers of the British public are just not going to put up with this. The march may be diverted.
Let me pick you up on that.
Diverted away from Whitehall. But
let me pick you up on that, because it's interesting, because you, like me, have been a very vocal, and passionate defender of free speech, and we know that includes that, that you have to accept that other people you may vehemently disagree with have a right to free speech. Christopher Hitchens, someone that you and I both admire.
But this isn't.
No, I'm going to come to my question, but Christopher Hitchens said the only thing that should be upheld at all costs and without qualification is the right of free expression, because if that goes, then so do all other claims of right as well. Now, what was interesting to me, I've been on a bit of a journey this week about what I really think about this, and Nicholas Soames actually said something that really made me sit up and take notice and change my mind about it, actually, because he's Churchill's grandson, he's a Conservative, and he said strongly yesterday that he thinks the march should be allowed to go ahead because the very freedoms that the people on Armistice Day who we honour, who gave their lives in the wars, they did so to preserve the freedoms of people like those marchers, the ones who are not being violent, the ones who are not showing pro-Hamas stuff.
I'm not sure about
that. They have a right to protest.
Well, we'll try to single those two things out for a second. First of all, I don't regard Nicholas Soames as a sort of hereditary inheritor of the mantle of Churchill just because he happens to be his grandson. Besides what you quoted from Christopher earlier, he would never have said that right extended to supporting terror groups. I mean, we're in a total quandary in the UK, as you know, and it's a despicable quandary to be in. We host Hamas leaders. We have a former deputy prime minister of Iran living in Harrow. We've been at the centre of allowing these people to be in our country and indeed to plot terror from our country for years. So it's always a bit rich to hear the British, I think, lecturing others about being an unsound part of the international security community. As for the actual marches, look, I'm afraid that the rules on this are very, very clear. You are not allowed to glorify terror or call for terror on the streets of Britain. And that existed before the 2006 Terrorism Act banned glorification, and it certainly exists now. If you stand on the streets of London calling for jihad, you are calling for terror, and that is actually a place where free speech is at its limit and is no longer permissible. It's the same with, for instance, calls for intifada on the London tubes. Remember, we had a touch of intifada on the London tubes a few years ago. So again, calling for intifada is something that you're not allowed to do in the UK.
Okay, but Douglas, let me ask you this.
You're not allowed to. Let me finish one other case. You're not allowed to stand on the streets of London and call for the murder of Jews or any other minority.
No.
And yet people have been getting away with this Saturday after Saturday. And are the police arresting people? No.
Right.
No, they're not. The police last week said we're outnumbered.
Right, so that is a key point. The police have said, Met Commissioner Sir Mark Rowley said, the laws created by Parliament are clear. There is no absolute power to ban protest. Therefore, there will be a protest this weekend. But the laws are also there to stop people brazenly supporting terrorism. So if people were to use a pro-Hamas banner or chant pro-Hamas sentiment, that would be against the current law of this country, and the police should take action. That's a different issue, though.
But it is, but it's not being policed.
No, I understand.
It's not being policed.
I understand. So on that, I can agree with you. The police need to enforce the existing laws. However, there will be a large...
They're not going to, because they're outnumbered.
But
they're outnumbered, so they're not
you and
going
I can
to.
agree that that's wrong, but that shouldn't mitigate the rights...
Well, don't you think that matters? Hang on, don't you think that matters?
No, it does matter.
That means that we have a rule of law, but it's not able to be policed. What's the point of having a law if you can't police it?
Well, I agree with you, but I also think that there are a large number of those protesters who genuinely are, in their eyes, protesting for peace, and they're pro-Palestinian, and they have a view in the way that you're...
Well, I disagree with that. And I'll tell you one reason why. The crowds in question are 100 times larger than the number of people who came out when hundreds of thousands of people were being killed in Yemen. They are 100 times larger than the number of people who came out when Bashar al-Assad killed hundreds of thousands of people in Syria. Seems to me that the people in question only care if one side in the particular conflict happens to involve the Israelis.
But they're allowed to.
Very excited.
But they're allowed to.
So I don't... Well, they're allowed to, absolutely, and we can make judgments about them. But I would not presume by any means that what you're talking about are pro-peace people. They're anti-Israeli. That's it.
Well, but they're allowed to be anti-Israeli. I think that's the point. They're not allowed...
Sure, they're allowed to be anti... If you're allowed to be... In that case, I suppose we have to allow people to be anti-other nations as well. I mean, Britain was founded at the same... Israel was founded in the same year, within the year of Pakistan. Maybe we should allow large protests of hundreds of thousands of people to go around the streets of London protesting that Pakistan doesn't have a right to exist or a right to defend itself.
Well,
Maybe we should allow this. I don't think it's a good precedent whatsoever.
Hang on. I don't think you have a right to say that Israel doesn't exist. If you want the extermination of all people in Israel, that is a criminal offence. However, if you are literally, as I said...
Well, it doesn't seem to be a criminal offence, Piers. It doesn't seem to be a criminal offence.
You and I can agree on that. I'm not disagreeing with you about...
We're clearly in a position where they're not policing the law.
No, I understand.
Otherwise, we wouldn't have all of these videos of people inciting violence on the streets.
But Douglas, you and I can agree that the police need to enforce existing law. There's no dispute between us on that, and they should be doing that a lot more. But we also, I think, have to surely look at the people who are genuinely there in a non-violent manner, of which there are many. These are massive protests. I think back to the protests, for example, against Donald Trump when he came to London, against America because he was the president. We allowed that to happen. I didn't necessarily agree with them, but we allowed them to happen. You know, I remember Madonna saying we should blow up the White House, a women's march in Washington. That happened, and people accepted that.
Well, but here's a very important point on that, Piers. Madonna almost certainly, so far as I know, has no military capability behind her. So when Madonna says, I'd like to blow up the White House, it's a piece of stupid rhetoric from a pop star. When you've just had the largest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, and you have Hamas supporters and others marching through London calling for it to happen again, that does matter, because there is a capability. So there is a difference, isn't there?
Well, there is, but I don't think that all of these protesters are pro-Hamas.
And the difference is whether or not you have a large artillery behind you.
Yeah, but you don't honestly think they're all pro-Hamas, these people?
Well, I think that anyone who, for instance, chants things like "from the river to the sea" is in fact
but they're not all doing that,
or is criminally ignorant. Oh well, they are. I mean, there's masses of videos of them marching past Westminster Abbey last week saying exactly that.
Yeah, but they're not all doing it.
Marching past the statue of Winston Churchill last week.
I've watched the videos, and there are lots of people chanting, and some who aren't.
Okay, well, here's a challenge. Here's a challenge, Piers. If you decided to go on some kind of march and in week one you discovered that you had the BNP along your side calling, for instance, for the murder of all black people, would you not wonder whether or not you should go on week two? And would you not drop out by about week three? I'd have thought so. I would.
That's a good question. And yes, I would. But that doesn't actually...
Good.
That shouldn't...
Right, so we can tell something about the marchers.
Well, you can say that you have a view, your own opinion is they shouldn't be marching alongside these other people. However, they are still entitled, in a free democratic country like ours. And look, I don't have absolute opinions on this. I just think it's a really interesting test of how far free speech goes.
Well,
and I do feel
here's
uncomfortable...
Here's the interesting test, if I could say so.
Yeah, sure.
The interesting test, if I can say so, Piers, is there are limits to this, in fact. You are not allowed to glorify the murder of people on the streets of Britain. You are not allowed to be a member of a prescribed terrorist group in Britain. But I return to the point I made at the start. We allow it. I repeat, we have Hamas commanders living in the UK who take welfare in the UK and use it to commit terror. Why are they not locked up? Because we have laws that we don't pursue.
Yeah.
We have criminal charges that we don't use. The person in particular I'm thinking of, Mohammed Sawalha, got British citizenship. You're meant to sign a form saying you're a person of good character to become a British citizen. Can you say that somebody who was a former military commander of Hamas in the West Bank is, quote, a person of good character? I'd say not. So again, like the police, like many other people, the border control in the UK doesn't enforce the law, doesn't care to do so. And I repeat, there is a serious problem with this in the UK. Israel, as you can see tonight, can look after itself. I wonder if Britain can say the same.
Yeah, listen, I understand that point. You've also said it will have to be counted if the march goes ahead because the British public shouldn't have to put up with it. But what does that mean in reality? Yes. You're not endorsing people to go confront them, are you?
No, not at all. I would suggest that if the cenotaph, for instance, comes under attack, there should be a peaceful ring of people around the cenotaph to protect it, as with other monuments. And I think that that's what many people will do. I hope they do so peacefully. But as this goes on and as the provocations grow and grow, I'm very, very afraid from what's going to happen this weekend coming in the UK. Personally, I think it's safer in Israel these days than it is in central London, certainly for Jews.
Let's talk, given you're over there right now, what concerns me about what Israel is doing is not their efforts to get rid of Hamas, but because of the particular nature of Hamas embedding themselves amongst civilian populations with the massive amounts of civilian casualties that will inevitably come, and that figure will grow and grow and grow. Are we not, as Barack Obama warned, are we not creating here just an opportunity for far greater radicalization of all those young Palestinians who watched their loved ones get killed? Why would we imagine that at the end of all this, they're going to want to do anything other than to become a new version of Hamas in wanting to exact revenge for what happened to their families?
Well, two things. One is, if you just follow the logic of what Barack Obama said, then you just shouldn't do anything. If you're Israel, you should be attacked and just sit back and say, great, we'll wait for the next one. But the second and more important thing is, your question supposes that there is a sort of peaceful Palestinian population in the Gaza who would love a two-state solution, and then a few bad apples in Hamas. I think that's not true. Why is it that when one of the victims of the music festival, a poor young German Jewish girl who it seems was raped and then brutally murdered and taken into the Gaza naked. Why was it that you can find, and anyone can find this online, a crowd of ordinary Gazans? It wasn't Hamas, it wasn't a Hamas rally. Ordinary Gazans spitting on her body, hitting her body, mutilating her body further as it went down the street. Does that strike you, Piers, as a placid population of peacenik types who are just desperately waiting for a two-state solution to be put back on the table for the millionth time in the last 70-something years? It doesn't seem like that to me.
No, but there are over 2 million people in Gaza, and there weren't 2 million people in that video clip. There were a few hundred. So I don't like to make...
Yeah, well, a few hundred at random. And did you see anyone in it saying, hey, guys, stop. We're not meant to mutilate the bodies of girls or rape them in public? No, I didn't see that.
But then what you're really articulating, correct me if I'm wrong here, but isn't what you're articulating really an endorsement of collective punishment, where you assume they're all guilty?
No.
And if they don't stand up to Hamas, they're also guilty. And that's where people have a problem, I think, with the moral line here, which is if you hold all the Gazans equally responsible, then is that not collective punishment, which is illegal?
Well, first of all, there is some responsibility for the peoples in the Gaza. If you elect Hamas and they kill Fatah, and then they remain in power for all of the years afterwards, I'm afraid that there is some responsibility of the people in that situation. You know, when the Germans had Adolf Hitler come to power and voted for him, we in Britain took the view that the German people were responsible in some way. So I'm not for collective punishment per se, but nor am I for this idea that there is something unique going on in the Israeli-Gaza context that we in Britain couldn't understand.
Actually, there is one unique thing.
In our own history, we've done very similar things.
But there is one unique thing, which is that the population of Gaza is pretty unique in that nearly half of the population are children. That is a unique situation.
No, I'll tell you what's unique about the population of Gaza. It's the only population in the world where people routinely claim Israelis are committing genocide, but which has a population boom all of the time. I mean, that strikes me as being quite an interesting thing about the Gaza. But as for the moral community, I want to make a very, very important point, if I can say so, on this, which is, people quite often abuse history, and they say things all the time. I mean, about the only thing anyone from history knows is about the Nazis. Here's something I can tell you with absolute certainty, Piers, having not just seen some of the results of what Hamas did on the ground here in Israel a few weeks ago, but having watched the videos of the unedited footage, which I was one of the journalists was sadly allowed to see the other day. I can tell you one thing: the comparison between Hamas and the Nazis is insufficient. And sorry, there's an incoming.
Get safe, Douglas.
Come.
Are you okay, Douglas?
It came from the other direction, so... Okay, anyhow, we're okay.
Are you okay?
Let's just... Yeah, it's fine. Sorry, it was a rocket coming. It looked like it was just going to land on us here.
Which way was that rocket coming from?
Okay.
Was it coming from Gaza or from Israel?
Yes, it seemed to be coming from Gaza, so... Yeah, it's fine. It's okay, it's been happening all day. Let me just finish this point, if I may.
Before we go on, Douglas, Atman, how does that make
Sure.
you? How does that make you feel? What just happened there?
I mean, it's I'm a little used to it. I was in Ukraine last year and was in Kherson and Odessa and Mykolaiv, and when the Russians were shelling it, so I'm a little used to it. But just if I can just finish this point, sorry, there's a lot of banging going on, but anyway, we'll keep going.
Well, look, if you need to stop, Douglas, we understand.
No, don't worry. If we need to stop, I'll run to the shelter, I assure you. The thing that struck me, Piers, about seeing the 7th of October footage was that even the Nazis were actually ashamed of what they did. SS battalions who spent their days shooting Jews in the back of the head and pushing them into trenches had to get very, very drunk in the evening to forget what they had done. The Nazi high command famously had to sort of get around the problem of soldier morale because the soldiers knew this wasn't exactly what their lives were meant to look like either. I tell you one very big difference. If you look at the footage, the raw footage, and I really hope people don't on a wider scale have to view what I viewed the other day, if they see it, they will see something that is at least as barbaric as what the Nazis did. But here's the difference. They did it with glee. They were deeply proud. You see people trying to, taking the head off a young Israeli man with a shovel and then calling their parents back in Gaza and telling them, Father, I've killed 10 Jews with my own hands. Get mother on the phone. I want to tell her how great a job her son has done. I come back to this thing. I'm not exaggerating this. It's very, very interesting, and people need to realize you had this situation with the Nazis, where they also were a genocidal anti-Semitic organization, but they tried to cover their crimes up. Hamas are actually proud of them, and they've said they will do them until the whole world is clear of Jews.
Yeah.
So I suggest we take that seriously, and I think that Israel is taking it seriously. I hope they continue to take it seriously, but I think the world should take it seriously, and that includes Britain. And when I hear British journalists, British commentators, and British politicians lecturing the Israelis on what they should do, I think, I'm sorry, this shows a failing in our country. It shows that we in Britain cannot enforce our laws. We don't even enforce our borders in Britain. It's us that is the weak link in the international security chain on this, not Israel.
Douglas, how does this war end? Netanyahu said yesterday that he sees at the end of this, Gaza falling under Israel occupation for an indefinite period. Now, there are many people in Israel who absolutely want Netanyahu out and hold him accountable for what happened on October the 7th in terms of the failing of defence and security. He's deeply unpopular now amongst his own people. But this whole idea that you somehow reconcile this 75-year conflict, which has blown up into warfare time and time again, by Israel ending up as a completely occupying force, that seems to me utterly untenable.
Yeah. Well, I think that, I mean, look, it's too early to tell. I would just say this, and I've said this before, but Israel is one of the only countries in the world that's never allowed to win a conflict. It has been left with this question of the Palestinians in the West Bank, the question of the Palestinians in Gaza. It's been left with this for years. And by the way, I say left with it because, remember, the Jordanians could solve the problem in the West Bank immediately by taking the Palestinians therein or taking some kind of control. They don't want to. The Egyptians, I have friends who were born in Gaza when it was owned by the Egyptians, run by the Egyptians. The Egyptians could solve the Gaza problem tomorrow by allowing the Gazans into Egypt or taking control of the Gaza themselves. Nobody wants the Palestinians people. And there's this endless mistake that is being made, and it has been made all my lifetime, certainly, which is that there's this unsolved problem, but it is the job of the Israelis to solve it. What is happening behind me is a demonstration of the fact that it is an insoluble problem that the Israelis keep being told to solve. Gaza, ever since the Israelis left it in 2005, could have become Singapore. It could have become a thriving place. But Hamas didn't want that. They wanted to turn it into a place. Instead of building upwards, they built downwards. Instead of building great buildings, they built great tunnels. This is a tragedy for the Palestinian peoples, but it's one that has been brought on them by groups like Hamas, who do not want a settlement in this war.
Douglas Murray, so powerful to talk to you there on the Gaza border. And I'm glad that you came through what was a pretty scary moment in the middle of that interview. And I appreciate you coming back and continuing the interview as if nothing had happened. Quite remarkable to witness, I have to say, from the safety of my London studio. But I do appreciate it, and stay safe out there.
That's right. Will do. Very good to see you, Piers.
Thanks, Douglas.